Last season, the Boston Celtics finally climbed the mountaintop, and they reached the pinnacle of NBA achievement. After years of questions surrounding the duo of Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum about if these two had what it took, or if their similar playstyles were going to be a detriment to the team long term, they finally won an NBA championship. Fast forward to this year, and this team is still a juggernaut in the Eastern Conference, but they are not unrivaled in the East. And the NBA as a whole looks as competitive as it has ever been. It is not a question of talent or ability for the Celtics, but a question of the talent and ability of the teams that they're going to have to face in the development of the NBA as a whole. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you very much for tuning in. And today, we ask the question, can the Boston Celtics repeat and win their second straight NBA championship? Now, to begin here, before we establish the circumstances and the situation that this team is going to be matched up against, it is important to first consider what this team has going for them, and that is, of course, their roster. This is one of, if not the best starting five in the entirety of basketball, especially with the way that the NBA is designed today, where they cater to the three-pointer. This is a perfect setup for that. Because on the offensive end, whether it's year one in Drew Holiday, tier 5 in Kristaps Porzingis, everyone is a lights-out shooter for this offense. But they don't just stop there with a high volume of threes and an efficient volume of threes. No. They translate that to the defensive side of the court as well. Head to toe, this roster is a unit defensively. Even their primary offensive superstar in Jayson Tatum, when so often those archetypes of players, they might focus all of their efforts on the offensive end and leave a lot to be desired on defense just because of the fact that they can still impact the game at a high level because of their offensive ability. Jayson Tatum was different. While a lot of the defensive work goes through the likes of Drew Holiday or Derek White, there is no one player that you can really exploit, at least on the starting five. And Tatum, for as great of an offensive player as he is no slouch defensively either, and that's really special. Starting at the point guard, you've got Drew Holiday, a two-time NBA champion, and he didn't win those rings by happenstance. He was a vital part in both the Bucks championship run and that for the Boston Celtics. And his blend of being a very capable offensive player as well as one of the best perimeter defenders, especially for his position in the entire NBA, is one that leads to plenty of success. And we've seen that in the past, and there's no reason that cannot continue. Then you've got Derek White, the perfect glue guy for this team. He does a little bit of everything, and the Boston Celtics ask him to do a little bit of everything, and he does that perfectly fine. He does it to the level of being probably the best role player in the entire NBA in the eyes of many fans. No matter what you ask him to do, Derek White is always up to the task, especially on the defensive end of the court. And that is so valuable. Then you've got Jaylen Brown, who is coming off of winning a finals MVP for this team. And the question with Jaylen Brown was always this. The Boston Celtics are committed to Jayson Tatum as their franchise cornerstone, but where does that leave Jaylen Brown? And before they won a title, the question marks were always to the fact of this team hasn't won a title yet, despite being very talented, and they are led by this duo in the front court of Brown and Tatum. Are their play styles too similar to the point where they contradict each other almost? Because when you think of duos, often you might think of, the point guard throwing lobs to the center, styles that play off of each other. But with Jaylen Brown, his value is that he is even more complimentary because of his similarities to Jayson Tatum. Inconsistencies happen. In the case of Jayson Tatum, he might score 50 in one playoff game and 19 the next. Or he might go without doing much of the first 3 quarters, and we might score about 20 in the fourth. We've seen instances of that in the playoffs. But what Jaylen Brown is able to do is because he plays somewhat similarly to Tatum and have a similar role in the offense. When Tatum's having an off night, if you give the ball to number 7, you can absolutely trust in him. And a couple years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. There was that finals run where, of course, there was the instance of we had this joke where Jaylen Brown had no left hand because when he had to resort to using his offhand for ball handling purposes because other teams would attack his dominant hand, it didn't work out very well. But Jaylen Brown evolved and became an even better player, and he's all the more valuable because of that. Then you add in his defense, and that takes his game to an entirely different level. The Boston Celtics are not where they are today without Jaylen Brown on the roster. Then, of course, we get to the superstar in Jayson Tatum. And this is someone who catches a fair amount of criticism, but in my mind, we kind of got spoiled by the everlasting, unquestionable greatness of guys like Curry or LeBron or Kevin Durant, where these guys for more than a decade were night in, night out these superstars, and their legacy was never in doubt. But that is really not normal. Even with someone like Luka Doncic, a consistent top 5, a lot of time top 3 player in the NBA, even he has question marks about his defensive abilities and what led him getting traded, his conditioning. It is rare for even the best of the best to not have some kind of question mark surrounding them. And when you look at a guy like Jayson Tatum, there aren't really any major flaws in his game. He can do a little bit of everything whilst being your primary offensive hub. Because a lot of the playmaking duties for this team, they don't just fall on Drew Holiday. But no, instead they go to Derek White, they go to Jaylen Brown, they go to Jayson Tatum, and they are all able to deliver quite well. Add that with among the superstars of the NBA, he is one of the better defenders. I think he catches a lot of unfair criticism, and there is some that can certainly be levied his way. But overall, this is a top 5 to 7 player in the entire league. And to prove last year he can be the number 1 on a championship team. Ultimately, Brown won that Finals MVP, but when it comes to the circumstance of this team, the number 1 option is Jayson Tatum for the most part. And then we get to Kristaps Porzingis, who, for a big man especially, is one of the best shooters in the NBA. And he is perfect for the modern association, in which has become vital for even a big man to be able to shoot the ball. And Kristaps does that at a very high level, fitting in with the Boston Celtics scheme perfectly of live by the 3, die by the 3. Kristaps quite frequently lives by it, and the Celtics are all the better for it. So now we've established the roster of this team, in the starting 5 at least, and how they work so well. Then we get to the bench, and that's where there's a little bit of question marks surrounding this team, because the depth leaves a little bit to be desired. You have a decent 7-man rotation with Peyton Pritchard and Al Horford coming off the bench. Pritchard has showed a lot of development this year. I've really enjoyed what I've seen from him. And then with Al Horford, despite his age, he is still a very steady player and a crucial part of this team. But then you get to the rest of the bench because come playoff time, you're going to have to run at least an 8-man rotation because playing games once every 2 days, guys are going to get tired. So often, yes, while it is crucial to play your starters quite frequently, at the same time, you don't want to overwork them. And once you get past the first 7 guys, there are question marks about the likes of a Sam Hauser or an Xavier Tillman, where there is talent to be displayed by these two. Sam Hauser, in his case, he is a lights-out three-point shooter, but outside of that, he doesn't contribute a whole lot more. So if he's having an off night shooting the ball, then he becomes a little bit less impactful. Then with someone like Xavier Tillman, come playoff time, he has struggled at times with inefficiencies. But truthfully, Tillman's not even getting into the rotation much anymore. That's more so going to Luke Cornett, who's quite solid in his own right. But if your big, like Kristaps, goes down for an extended period of time, Luke Cornett isn't necessarily who you want starting. So now we've kind of established the roster. Your starting five is stellar, but you do have some weaknesses in terms of depth. And then we get to the shape of the association, the state of the league. And it feels like rosters are more talented than they have ever been before. Ultimately, the best of the best are always going to be superstars no matter what era you're in. But as we get further down the roster, maybe to the eighth man, the talent that these players have put on display, if it was translated to a previous era, they might be a starter to kind of display the talent that is in the league today. And that's a very good thing for the fan, but if you're a team, it makes it hard to consistently experience success. And in the Eastern Conference, there are two primary examples of this. I would say one more so than the others. The first one is the New York Knicks, who are similar to the Celtics in a sense of they have a very good starting five, but their depth leaves a lot to be desired. Ultimately, if it came down to a matchup between these two teams, I would trust Boston more just because they've been there and they've done that. And meanwhile, for the Knicks, Karl Anthony Towns has been a great addition. Jalen Brunson is a playoff riser. Mikhail is an Iron Man, of course. Josh Hart has so much drive and determination, one of the best role players in the entire NBA. Much like Derek White, these two teams are very, very similar, but the Celtics just do it to a different level, a different tier, if you will. And I would take them in a playoff series. Now, the other primary threat to the Celtics in the East is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And this is a team that has bucked many of the trends of the modern NBA. They were patient with their roster, they didn't make too many changes. And they've got two bigs out there who aren't great at spacing the floor necessarily. Although Evan Mobley, to his credit, has absolutely improved in that regard. But the Cavs have gone on two stretches this season where they have won 15 straight games. This is a team that has two defensive anchors in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. And then on the offensive end, you have two juggernauts in Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. And much like the Knicks, although in a different way, this team is quite similar to Boston. They remind me of the Celtics in quite a few ways. And that comes down to Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. Because with the Celtics, there was always this question of if Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, if their skill sets are too similar to be complementary, and if they are instead contradictory. Ultimately, things panned out for them. But that was certainly a question. And much in the same way, the Cleveland Cavaliers, there are question marks about if Donovan Mitchell and Garland were too similar. These smaller guards who are primary offensive hubs, very offensively skilled, but they leave a little bit to be desired because of their size on the defensive end. But things have worked out very, very well for Cleveland this year. And with their new head coach, the sky is the limit. And they are, in my opinion, without a doubt, the biggest threat to Boston in the Eastern Conference. When it comes to projecting that series, there would be a lot of X's and O's, a lot of matchups to watch. And if we ever did get that, I would love to do a more thorough analysis of how that series could go. But for now, the Celtics have one primary threat and another on the outside looking in the Eastern Conference. When compared to last year, it was a little bit of an easier road. And then we get to the West. Say they make it to the finals. In the West has been a bloodbath all season. And it feels like there's quite a few teams that you could make an argument for having a chance to come out the other side NBA champions. Whether it is, of course, the number one seeded Oklahoma City Thunder with their blend of both youth as well as perhaps the MVP of the league in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Whether it is the Los Angeles Lakers who have been scorching hot as of late, but the Celtics just beat not too long ago. The Houston Rockets feel like their inexperience is going to get to them, so probably not them. The Denver Nuggets, you can never count them out with the ability of their generational center in Nikola Jokic. Even teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves and Golden State Warriors, who had middling starts to the season throughout 42 games, have been really hot as of lately. Then, of course, there's a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who, when everybody's healthy, are consistently one of the best teams in the West. There's a lot of teams that could come out of that conference. And ultimately, by the time they face the Celtics, despite their talent, they might be a little bit weary. They might be a little bit tired from what could very well turn out to be hyper competitive series in the Western Conference. If that is the case, and meanwhile, if Boston is able to execute early and put matchups away quickly, as they might be projected to do so, it could be a series where the Celtics have had plenty of time to rest and prepare for the finals. If that's the case, I see Boston coming out with the championship. But given these circumstances, no matter what happens, it is certainly going to be a tougher road for the Boston Celtics to repeat than it was for their ring in year one. And that is not a knock at their championship run. No, it was very, very impressive. But this year, the talent of the NBA is on full display, and it is certainly no easy stretch for the Boston Celtics to win 16 games come the postseason. Whether it is the Cleveland Cavaliers or even the New York Knicks in their own conference, who in some ways are kind of mere reflections of the Celtics in the ways that their rosters were constructed, or the West and the parity of that conference. The Celtics have all the tools to repeat, but it certainly won't be an easy job. And that's all for today's episode of State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you very much for listening. I know we didn't necessarily have a definitive answer on if they are going to, but I want to come out and ask the question of can they? And if they are going to, that is a question for you to interpret. There are a lot of nuances, a lot of variables. They very well have a chance, but there are a lot of other teams coming for that throne